people don't know, but fiber is the thing that makes serotonin. So 95% of the serotonin in your body is made in your gut. Your microbiome takes fiber, turns it into short chain fatty acids, converts it into tryptophan in the liver, and then it turns into serotonin. Serotonin is what makes you happy. When you don't have serotonin, what you think makes you happy is pleasure, which is dopamine. When you get pleasure, you want more. When you have serotonin and you're happy, you know how much more happiness you want when you're happy? None. So you don't need more happiness, but you always need more pleasure. Yeah. Pleasure is the thing that everyone's hacking and selling you on that.
Welcome to the Beyond Tomorrow podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Jordan Shlain, the founder of Private Medical and doctor to some of the top tech titans we all know. In this episode, we cover everything from his upbringing, some of the key medical and health advice he's giving to his members, and some of the breakthroughs we can expect to see under RFK and beyond tomorrow. I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's dive in. Jordan, I want to kick things off by starting from your origin in Marin County in San Francisco. What made you the person that you are today?
Great question. I think it was the influence of my mother, who was a PhD in psychology, who wanted to sit and talk about things and really get to the root cause psychologically, what makes us go. She always used to say, you can be right or you can be in a relationship. And my father, who was a surgeon and kind of a hustler, surgeon, meaning he was always on call, always trying to help. But his whole line of business was, what's the problem? Cut it out, fix it, and then next. And so it was a very quick way to heal. Surgery is you fix it. Where psychology is more of I won't say it's a long-term wound, but it's a long-term process that constantly requires attention and care. Your
father famously said to you, you can do anything in life, but you have to become a surgeon. I think I'm slightly misquoting it.
Yeah, well, so he was the son of an immigrant, and his father told him, he grew up in Detroit, his father told him, you can be whatever you want, as long as you're a doctor. And I grew up at the age of 3 with him saying, son, you can be whatever you want, as long as you're a doctor. So I really didn't know I could be anything else. I always had a little bit of a entrepreneurial vein in my body, partially because if you look at my mom and my dad, both of their parents were entrepreneurs. They both became professionals, and then I probably was supposed to be an entrepreneur but became a professional, but still am very interested in seeing around the corner, over the hill, trying to understand what's coming next. I joke with people that I come from the future because I'm constantly looking at enough disparate things out there to impute what's probably going to come next. And, in San Francisco, like things happen to come next here before they come anywhere else. Seems to be the nexus of where all the risk takers come.
You seem to have a lot of gratitude for your dad wanting you to become a surgeon, right? I think quite a few children of immigrants, including myself, sometimes hold a tiny bit of resentment for parents pushing us in areas that we possibly didn't want to go into.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I was a B student in high school, and all my report cards said not meeting potential. So I always thought they're pissing me off because they say I'm smarter than I am, but I don't think I am. And it was only when I got to Berkeley undergrad that I decided that I was going to try to do as good as anybody else in this school, and wound up getting a 4.0 and straight A's. And I was like, holy smokes. And my dad was like, I knew you had it in you. And so he was always egging me on. And then I thought, well, I like science. In fact, I love science, especially chemistry. And I fell in love with organic chemistry, which is the class that most people hate. But I could see the molecules in my head, and I could visualize these reactions happening in the test tube in my head. And so it came very naturally to me, this kind of complex problem solving of 3-dimensional spaces. And this was long before the internet or DeepMind or any of these AlphaFold things. But I would find myself, even in medical school, kind of visualizing protein folding. I was that guy, weirdo. I never really told anybody. In fact, I don't think I've ever told anybody until just now. But once I started to understand, math and biology and organic chemistry, and then my mom with the psychology, and then you try to take your computational mathematical physics structure and apply it to humans, and it all breaks down. Humans are way more complex than biology and math and physics. And that's when I thought I was going to be a surgeon. And then I thought, well, like internal medicine is where you really get to blend both physiology and psychology.
Gotcha.
And in fact, I did take a class called psychobiology as a freshman, which now I think it's called biopsychology.
Yeah.
Because they don't want psycho in front of anything. Yeah.
Before we dive straight in, I think it's amazing that we're in 2024 and still there's a belief that the mind and body are not connected. Mind, body.
Well,
some people call it
all
spirit.
Descartes, right? That was all his fault. He was the one who came up with the mind-body separation.
So going back to said student Jordan at 18, enjoying Berkeley in the 80s, I'm assuming.
Yeah, 80s.
Okay. What? So let's focus a bit more on the psychology side of things. Like, what was getting you interested at the time? I know San Francisco at the time and onwards was a hub of new thinking. So what were the things that were exciting you the most?
Well, there was just a sense that creativity was welcomed and embraced. You had all this great music that had just come out of the 70s and 80s, and then in the 90s, the internet turned on. Let me say, before the internet turned on in the 90s, I was taking computer classes in the 80s. I said to my dad, hey, there's this thing called an Apple computer. Even before Apple, there was the Amiga and the Commodore. Yeah. And when I saw those and they had them in class in Marin County, you could take programming classes. So I took programming classes and was making video games with code when I was like 14. I told my dad, send me to a computer coding camp. Yeah. And so I was always and everyone's like, what's a computer? Like, nobody wanted to go to the computer lab. They wanted to go to wood shop, or they wanted to play sports, and so I was always kind of trying to like tinker with these things that gave you a different perspective and creative outlet.
Because in Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, he talks about the example of the PC revolution and Bill Gates and all these individuals were in the perfect place, right? They were near Silicon Valley in the few schools in the entire world that had computers. So as a 14-year-old in the 80s, I'm not sure many people had their hands on a computer, right?
I don't think they did. And they used to have these hacker fairs in San Francisco. Wow. Because back in the day, you could open up the computer and there was like actual cards that you'd put in. And so they did hacker fairs where you could, buy these big chips that you put in your computer that would give it either more graphical power. Remember, the games were all 2-dimensional like Pong. Yeah. But like that was super cool. You could move something a little faster. So I used to go to the hacker fairs and try to hack open games that had codes. So we were just, that was 40 years ago. Yeah. And now hackers and not hackers as in a negative way, but people are still trying to, make games and have fun with it.
So what took you from being at the intersection of technology and medicine and psychology at such an early stage to kind of moving more into concierge medicine and into the new millennia?
Well, in medical school and even in training, which is out here, it's pretty pro forma. You must do this, and then you must do this, and then you are literally, if you had a creative bone in your body, you go into the system and you lose it all. They grind it out of you, and you are in a box. You're in that you don't even know you're in. Yeah. You're on a path with like a million rules. There's a hierarchical structure where this teacher's got a boss, that teacher's got and you're just at the bottom of the pecking order. It's a very clear cased system, more or less. And when I finished my training in 97, and I was like, okay, I got to get a job. And I went to work for this guy in downtown San Francisco, which, by the way, was like the nexus of the internet turning on, like all these startups. And I was taking care of all these young kids that were doing these startups and with these big internet companies. And I was like, God, that's kind of like the computer stuff. But I missed 8 years of college, medical school, and I took a year off and lived in Africa. So I had like 9-year gap of being in this box. Yeah. More or less. And then I can come out of the box and the internet's on. And so I took a job with this doctor, and he, was a nice guy, but I was seeing 25 patients a day. I felt like I never got to finish like with each patient's problems. They would come in with a problem, and if they had 3, I'm like, sorry, we can only talk about 1 because I only have time for 1. And I realized like the complexity of a human you can't box that up in 7 minutes, 10 minutes. You ultimately need to every conversation has a beginning and a middle and an end. And unless you get to the end, like if you cut things off in the middle or somewhere in the beginning, you just created more anxiety for that person. So an anxiety, mind body, leads to more physiologic, inflammation, stress, pick the thing. And if you don't actually run the psychology through its paces to understand what's really going on, or what are the signs and symptoms of a behavior, or what are the things that are driving another bad behavior, you're just treating symptoms. Yeah. So I wound up quitting that job because it was sucked my soul out. I was like, I can't. Like, my destiny is not 7-minute visits all day long. And I didn't really know what I was going to do when I walked down to downtown San Francisco, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And San Francisco was buzzing back in 1998. And I walked into this lobby of this building, sat down, wasn't sure where I was. I was just kind of disoriented because I just quit my job. I was unhappy, and realized I was in the lobby of the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. But I had never been in a Mandarin Oriental Hotel, but I saw these kind of fancy people coming and going, and it was bustling, and everybody was well dressed, and there's a lot of like energy. And I looked across the hall, and I saw the concierge desk, and I saw this lady chatting with all these people. So I walked up to her. I said, "Excuse me, who's the doctor you call when somebody gets sick here?" And she looked at me and she goes, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I could be the doctor you call when somebody gets sick here." And she said, "You're a doctor?" And I looked like I was, I was 15 years old. I was in a suit and a tie because I just walked out of the other office that I quit. And I said, "Yeah, I'm a doctor." She said, "Doctor, with all due respect, this is a 5-star hotel. And everybody we take care of here, we give 5-star service to." She said, "I'm a concierge, so I may be 3-star smart, but I do 5-star service." She says, "If you're a doctor, and you'll have to prove it to me, you're 5-star smart, but you guys do 1-star service. And if you want to be the doctor to my guests, you have to do 5-star service." So I thought to myself, okay, I just went 8 years of medical school and residency and pre-med, 11 years actually. I said, she has something that she wants to teach me. I can learn anything. Yeah. Like, I've kind of got a growth mindset. I'm super curious about everything. So I asked her, "Will you teach me?" And she said, "Prove to me you're a doctor." So I came back, a couple of days later with what the old paper medical chart, but it was like my resume, my letters of recommendation, my credentials, my diplomas. So I handed her a medical chart, but it was like my bio, my creative way of doing that. So next thing you know, I was the doctor to the Mandarin Oriental Hotel. And by the way, the principles of concierge, not concierge medicine, pay attention, don't be rushed, follow up, follow through, anticipate the next thing. These are all like things it's foundational decorum of good behavior. Yeah. Like, this is not anything rocket science. It's not earth shattering. Yeah. But in medical school, it's, you got to like go. And you're always in fear of somebody like slapping you down for getting something wrong. There's this really kind of this patriarchal command and control structure there. Yeah. And all of a sudden here I was, I'm like, I think I can do that. So she took me under her wing a little bit and said, "Listen, if I get a complaint that you're charging too much, that you're rushing, that you're not following up, following through," I thought, I can do all these things. Like,
so let's go back to, it was 2000? 98?
98.
98. Okay. So what were the key, let's call them asks of the guests at the time? What were they asking for? Was it just a headache or whatever they were coming in?
It was the headache. It was somebody was here for their wedding and they tripped and fell and they cut their head open, and could I sew them up? A little laceration. It was, I left my medicines in London. Can you call me to refill? There was nothing. It was all urgent care.
Was it pay as you go? Was it actually?
And it was pay as you go. Yeah. And so, you remember the credit card things where you had to go like, this is, I'm dating myself now. It's Square, it's Tap. Yeah. Or the hotel would just pay me in cash, and the person would put it on their room. Like you put like a spa or a room service on your room.
Did you realize back then that you were creating a new business model, or you were readjusting a business model for an industry that had never seen anything like it?
Great question. I felt like I was doing something that created a ton of value for the end user, which was the patient. And it created a bunch of joy within me. And so I thought, okay, they like it and they don't mind spending the money on it. Now, mind you, 1 year prior, when I was at that doctor's office seeing 7 to 10 patients, like an hour, it felt like, they would have to do a $5 little copay or a $10 copay with the nurse at the front. And it was like tug of war. They didn't want to pay the $10 because they felt like, hey, I already paid insurance. Why am I paying you additional money? And my realization is it wasn't that the $10 meant something to them. It's that they didn't see the true value of what was happening here in this kind of like old school doctor's office. And if you look around this one, it doesn't feel like a doctor's office. I intentionally designed this to feel like your friend's house. You don't see my best doctor awards. You don't see my diplomas. You don't, this is about you. This isn't about me. The reason why we're here. But to answer your question, I do feel that I felt something inside of me that like I hadn't felt before, which was like, this is what the answer is. Like the answer is how do you meet people where they are? How do you spend enough time with them so they feel valued, included, and safe? Safe to be vulnerable, to tell you what's really going on. I mean, I remember I saw this, I saw this woman and she had a migraine and it turns out that like her husband was divorcing her and like she kind of just opened up and told me everything. And she was distraught. And so she decided to stay at a hotel and like clear her head. I mean, the reason why she really called me was for migraine medicines. But then when I started, probing a little bit more and I just, created the space, I was like, okay, this is the way that the world needs to work. Right. And it doesn't work like that. So then I just started doing more hotels. And then of course, September 11th happened and the internet bubble burst. And so my transactional urgent care model that I had been doing, where people flew from out of town and stayed at hotels, I was doing like $3 million in revenue. By the way, between 98 and 2001, I had hired 7 doctors. I had a thriving business in San Francisco. It was called San Francisco On-Call Medical Group. Every internet company, every law firm, every hotel. I was the guy that gave out their cell phone, gave out their pager, and gave out their email address in 1998. Why? Because I wanted to make communication friction zero. Why? Because as soon as you have a problem that's in your head and you try to like solve it, this is before Google, so you couldn't Google it, you would ask your friend and you would start getting more and more anxious. So the longer the delay of the problem or the concern you have in getting the answer makes you more stressed. So to me, it was like, let me just remove the stress right away. Now, going back to my dad, he was the chief of surgery in San Francisco. So in San Francisco, I grew up with every doctor in San Francisco because he was always courting them to send him their surgical referrals. So I knew every nephrologist, neurologist, ENT. They were all friends of my dad. So if I saw you at the hotel and we needed a specialist, I would just call one of my dad's friends. Hey, so I was able to get in quickly. And my father was a surgeon. So if he needed surgery, I'd say, Dad, fire up the OR. This person needs their appendix out. He'd like send them on down. I'll fire up the OR. And that was a different era when surgeons and doctors had more control over hospitals. Now hospitals control doctors to the point where doctors are like literally, they're like line workers. They have 0 degrees of freedom especially within all this technology metrics that may or may not mean anything, but it's a control structure that the doctors, again, it's another box that they're put in, but this box has got like much more tightly wound screws and bolts and, they have no degrees of freedom. But all to say is, and then when the market crashed, I literally had to lay everybody off. I went from $3 million to 0 almost overnight. That sucked.
Market crashing in 9/11, right? Okay.
Well, no, 9/11 was just September 11th, the terrorist attack, but the internet bubble.
The internet bubble. Sorry.
All these internet companies that were bubbling up, that crashed. And so, that was fueling a lot of the business that I had was people coming into town, doing deals. It wasn't just the beauty of San Francisco. A lot of it was like, internet fueled deals. So that's when I said to my partner, I said, we have big problems here because we have all this overhead and now we have 0 revenue. And so what I realized then was all my colleagues that were doctors who took insurance, they were not affected by September 11th or the bubble bursting because their clients had insurance and those insurance contracts lasted to the end of the year and the patients could always go on COBRA. So they may see a little bit of a decrement in their business, a little bit. Mine fell off a cliff instantly. So if you ever want to teach someone in business school how business is like, have them go have a business of $3 million and growing at 25% a year to 0 in like a week. So I told my partner and I'm like, what are we going to do? And he's like, I have no idea, but we're we're effed here. And I said, well, we've been doing this transactional, reactive visit from out of town. What if we just turn the whole thing upside down and did proactive subscription, relational for people who live here? And we'll charge an annual fee, a subscription fee. And he said, no one's going to do that. I said, someone's going to do that. Like it's basically giving all these out of towners this amazing service. Why don't we give it to the people who live here?
Yeah.
And so that was in 2001, 2002 was when we started really having to think about it. And I won't mention names because can't do that. But one of the early tech titans, who's now a tech titan, called me up. I got a phone call while me and my partner were arguing about how we were going to start a membership company. And he's like, everybody's lost half their net worth. There's no way anyone's going to pay us an annual subscription fee. I said, somebody will. Almost as though I manifested. The phone rings like the next day and someone says, hey, is this Dr. Shlain there? Yes. Hey, my boss who you saw at the Mandarin Oriental a couple of years ago sold his company. He's moving to San Francisco. He wants to know if you'll be his doctor. I said, yes, sure. He said, can he come in today? Yeah. He said, how much does it cost? I said, well, it's a subscription fee. It's a couple $1,000s a year. He said, great. Can he come in and bring a check? And I said, sure. So the guy shows up, gives me a check and signs up and says, I've got a bunch of friends who are moving to San Francisco. Can I tell them? I said, sure. So all of a sudden we got this little group of younger than me at the time. I must have been 35 or something. And they were like younger than me, a couple of years.
Can I just pause there? Because what I'm hearing is luck came about because of all the hard work that you've been doing for those years before. And it seems pretty serendipitous.
Yeah, well, I think there's four kinds of luck, right?
Were you expecting that moment to happen? When you were talking to your co-founder about the possibility of changing to that more
but
proactive?
I think that if you want something to happen, if you believe that it should happen and you keep your antenna up, you will find your way to making it happen, or it will find its way to enabling the thing that you saw or feel or know, and everyone tells you it'll never work. Like people told me it would never work. Now they don't say that, but for the first decade. And so because we learned from the concierge, we thought we'd call it concierge medicine. So, and that concierge who trained me in 1997 now runs membership for private medical.
Wow.
So we hired her like 7 or 8 years ago. I'm like, you know what, we're growing and we need someone like you to help get everybody on board with this kind of Forbes 5-star structure of, because you don't learn it in medical school. So I felt like I was, and then it started going, and the first 10 years were very slow, and everybody said it wouldn't work, and everybody was waiting for me to fail, and it was I was grinding 10 years of just one patient at a time, doing a great job every day. Every time somebody comes at you with a problem, you can solve it. But then the other side is, hey, let me identify for you the 4 problems that you don't know you're going to have by I'm going to dig deep. And by the way, back then we had nowhere near the sophistication of computational power, biology, blood test scans. Like it was still pretty ghetto back then as far as like high quality preventative and proactive medicine. Because there was a time where it was like, don't eat fat. And everyone was on a no fat diet, but that meant you were eating carbs and salt to fill, and so I always knew intuitively that whole foods were the right answer. I started a nonprofit called Eat Real. Originally it was the Institute for Responsible Nutrition, but I gave people handouts about how to eat. So this is the food is medicine thing, which everyone's talking about now. That's foundational 101 to me back then. So I felt like this was going to work, and every year it just grew, and at the beginning it grew small. And so did I know that it was going to be like at scale and that the whole world was going to do it? I felt like if it didn't, the world was like an idiot if it didn't, because this is just a better way. People now at scale, which is like, how do you turn a $4 trillion boat around or move? That boat doesn't want to move because there's $4 trillion of status quo money that doesn't want to see it change. So even if it turns 1 degree over the course of like 5 to 10 years, that's a big turn for a giant boat. But there's entrenched interests that absolutely don't want it to change. And there are also real big companies that call me up on a daily basis now we run this big healthcare system, or we have this big insurance company, and like we're trying to figure out like what is this little concierge thing that doesn't seem to stop growing? How's that going to impact like our business? And I think that there's a lot of disruption on the horizon. Sadly, I don't think it's in the next 3 to 5 years, just because until you reform payment, until you disrupt insurance companies, they control the cards.
Yeah.
And the healthcare systems and the hospitals, which are these big sprawling things too, they also control the doctors. So the healthcare systems control the doctors, the insurance company control the employers and the patients, at least in the United States, different than the NHS.
Yeah.
So, and then there's the medical institutions, the medical schools. Nothing's changed in medical school. Like they're not teaching AI, they're not teaching nutrition. Still, it's 2024. Like,
yeah,
there's and it's because of just people don't want to change, and it's a conservative field.
For me in the US, it feels like I'm constantly jumping through an obstacle course to eat healthily, to be healthy.
So,
And I would love to go a bit deeper into that, but I really want to talk about these 6 wellness phases that you've talked about recently in one of your blogs. It started in the 70s with crystals and organic foods, right? And it's moved into fitness and diet and beauty more recently, and onto psychedelics and digital health and all that. Going through each one of these phases, do you think wellness is a kind of niche that people like yourself and I and some of the listeners, or most of the listeners, are interested in? Or do you think as one wellness phase goes into the other, it starts to hit more into the mainstream?
Great question. So before I answer the question specifically, I was watching a sport thing yesterday, and there was a commercial for some biological drug for arthritis or some autoimmune disease. And people running and jumping and playing with their kids. It was older people that could have freedom to move their limbs.
Yeah.
So it was really a physical freedom without pain, which causes psychological stress. And I was thinking like, wow, we spend a lot of money on these drugs so that older people can move and feel better, and younger people too. And then the very next commercial was like a commercial for like some ice cream chain of like, which I knew where there's a ton of chemicals in it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so they're advertising, here's how you fix the problem. And then the next advertisement, here's how you get the problem. And the problem is both of them were really happy people running around. So I think that to answer your question, I think that there's a group of people that when they eat too much bad food over too much a period of time, they build a cage of their brain that can't think outside of their brain, becomes hijacked a little bit into dopamine craving more. I need more. In fact, and those people really can't see what wellness is, because they think wellness is comfort food.
Yeah.
Let me watch my TV. Let me have my high-speed internet. And so wellness to them is not physical or mental wellness. It's leave me alone and don't tread on me, and let me do what I want. Don't tell me what to do. There's freedom from and freedom to. There's 2 different types of freedom. And I think that there are some people, which is why I think the GLP-1s are so interesting, because as soon as people who are hijacked from these chemicals get on GLP-1, they start to get more interested in wellness all of a sudden, because they stop eating that crappy food. Yeah. And they start eating less, and they start sleeping more, and they start feeling better. And once you start feeling better, you want to feel more better. Yeah. But when you're like that frog boiling in the water where you just don't even know, it's like, just leave me alone and let me boil. Right? It's warm in here. I like warm. But I think then there are a subset of people that are into the hippie crystals. It's like, how do I, they're kind of the creative ones. How do I keep my eye on how do I empower myself? Yeah. So the whole wellness industry is, how do I avoid the medical system, and how do I become my own boss? Now, there's a blend. Like you ultimately want to have control over your life, but as soon as you don't, you want to have a healthcare system that helps you get that control back as fast as possible. Yeah. Right. But the healthcare system is a broke fix model. It only fixes things when they're broken. It doesn't help you not break them. Yeah. Here's a medication. Oh, you're depressed? Here's a pill. Instead of, hey, what's going on in your life? Why are you depressed? Is there genetic? Is there family history? Is it trauma? Is it something else? Like, and how do we work through the root causes to like not have you take that pill? That takes more time.
Yeah.
But the people now, so the wellness industry nowadays, there's like a gigantic, as I wrote in my piece, there's a lot of money to be made in selling stuff and selling futures and hopes and dreams, and without a lot of scientific evidence. And so now you can, the healthcare system's so bad that you'll gamble on yourself by buying these supplements or getting these scans or doing these tests that aren't scientifically proven. But they've got the commercial with the guy running down the field, and it's all marketing really. Yeah. And so I just try to tell people like, look, you have to be smart about this stuff, because you don't want to try to do some wellness intervention, which is actually going to shorten your life.
Yeah.
Now, the placebo effect is real. 30% of people who do stuff, basically, that is a nothing, feel better. I gave a talk recently where there was a supplement that people took, and one of my patients wanted to take, and I said, can we do a test and see what's in that supplement? It was an injection supplement, which I was like, yellow flag, why don't you just eat more of the food that has that protein in it? So we wound up, I said, there's a company in, it's been written up in all the newspapers in New York called Valisure, and they do all the post-generic testing. So if there's a generic drug that comes in from India or Israel or wherever, they test it to make sure that the drug's actually in there in the quantity that it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Trust and verify. So this is the verification company. So the CEO is a friend of mine. So I said, hey, my patient of mine wants to inject this, carnitine in his body, and I would like to test this vial to see if the quantity that's in there's in there, and if there's not something else in there. So we run the test. It's pretty expensive, but the patient paid for it because he wanted to know, and I mandated it before you inject anything in your body. It wound up having it had an herbicide in there. It had 2 derivatives of MDMA, which is ecstasy. It had all these other molecules in there that were just like weird reactants. I'm like, whoa. Yeah. Okay, that was in a thing that, if you go to this company's website, they sell all these supplements to all these people, and this is just one out of many of their SKUs. And I was like, holy moly. So wellness is marketed great, but I tell people, before you put something in your body or on your body, or before you do some blood test or scan or whatever, ask to see the publications that are peer reviewed and like show the evidence. Yeah. Because you can't find them. And if you can't find them, you are guinea pigging yourself on a strategy of you hope it works. And if it doesn't, you're going to wind up you're going to wind up in the healthcare system that you tried to avoid. So there's like a smart strategy. I think you have to be critical, skeptical, curious. You have to be open-minded, but you can't believe the dogma of marketing. Like that, that I think is the death knell for, people that want to do wellness is trusting the influencers and the internet prophets, the TikTok prophets.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please feel free to hit the subscribe button below. It makes a huge difference. Now, let's get back to the episode. I feel this ability to look past what is being told of us by government, by officials, etc., has become more mainstream since COVID. I think a lot of people grew skeptical of what was being told of them. And so, especially in the US, you see a movement of people now looking at alternatives more so than I would say in Europe. There's still that skepticism, that risk aversion in Europe and in the UK that I see.
More conservative in Europe.
Yeah, for sure. So as someone who takes a bunch of supplements and has taken supplements that are being popularized by some top longevity influencers and professors, how do I build trust in what I'm taking? I tested after taking a stack and found that my creatinine levels were through the roof. I was going to get kidney issues if I carried on
That's
it.
Right. That's right.
So where do we start? Because in the end, very few people can get tested every 2 months or every 6 months. Well,
yeah. So I mean, part of the fundamental, I'm going to get deep into philosophy here a little bit, but it's, we live in our religion is liberal democratic capitalism. Capitalism is our religion. Yeah. And I people who are in a religion don't know they're in that religion until they get out of it. But we are all entrenched in this accumulation, this society of I need to look better, I need to accomplish more, I need to accumulate more. That's just the world we live in. I'm not besmirching it. I'm calling out that that's the thing. So in that religion of capitalism that we're in, how do I get more, right? So this concept is more is better. I would argue that better is better, and more is not necessarily better. So a lot of these TikTok influencers or Instagram influencers, if they're promoting something that they're making money off of, right? That to me is like, okay, do they take it themselves? You'll never know, right? Because they say they will. But because there's so much money to be made from an influencer, by these companies, there's no real like trust mark that these, let me show you an independently validated company ran the tests on what's in here. I mean, there's so much junk in a lot of these supplements. So like, who are the supplement companies that are legit? And by the way, we're compiling a list here at Private Medical of the companies that we've done diligence on. So we eventually will be publishing, and we're working with a bunch of other groups to run everything through Valisure or these other verification companies. There's another one online. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But so make sure that what you're taking is actually what's in it. And there is some provenance of these things. Part one. Part two is if you're taking something to optimize something, right? You have to then verify and check what the thing is that you're trying to optimize. Or, like your case, what are the downsides? Everything comes with a risk. Everything comes with a benefit. So a lot of people are just promoting the benefits. They're not talking about the risks. So the other thing I always say is if someone's promoting benefits and they don't tell you the risks, then you're not skeptical enough because you have to. There's no such thing as a benefit without a risk. Some risk. And one of the risks may be it doesn't work and you're just risking your money. Now that's just, who cares? Maybe I want to risk that money.
But this individualism, I think it's, again, far more mainstream in the US for people to make that individual decision themselves. And the beauty of ChatGPT and Google nowadays is that we can be a bit more decisive ourselves. The reason why I say that is for a very long time, 5 a day was a big thing in the UK. If you have 5 fruit or veg, you are meeting your health needs, right? And that could include a bit of orange juice, etc. It was so simple for a whole nation, right? So you're gonna say something here, but I just want to understand, like, how does one motivate themselves to be individualistic in a society that's often telling them they should do it this way or they need to be this way?
So first of all, you said that people make their own decisions, and I would argue that, like, do they? Now, I'm not saying there's no free will, but when you're marketed from all angles, take this thing, whether it's by government or an influencer, was it really your decision? I mean, it kind of is, but you're influenced by, and so the decision you make is based on like the information you get, and unless you're skeptical and look for other information. And I think that, fundamentally, I think what's cool is like these trackers. Like I'm wearing a sleep tracker, right? So someone tells me their supplement's going to make me sleep better, right? Okay, now I can measure and validate that thing. There's a bunch of blood tests now. There's a bunch of blood tests for aging. Are you aging faster or slower than you should? There's like a bunch of them, and I personally did like 7 of them a couple of years ago, last year. They all told me I was different ages. So what does that mean? It means that they're either one of them's right or they're all wrong. And which one's right? I know how old I am, but one says I'm 4 years older, one says I'm 8 years younger, and they're all black boxes of their chemistry and. So like ultimately what you want to do is you want to find, so when I tell people say, is the Oura ring or the Whoop, is it accurate? I'm like, you're not looking for perfection. You're looking for directional trends of these things. And so if you take a magnesium supplement and you get a little bit more sleep every night, and then you stop the magnesium supplement and you get worse sleep every night, you can draw some conclusions that affected that. So if you don't have the feedback loop to validate, or I took creatine, if you don't do a blood test to see if it's not super high in your body to calibrate it, everyone's just, they want the big muscles. They want to go, they saw the guy in the commercial or the back of the airplane magazine selling it. Like, they don't say, and by the way, you must check your creatinine in your blood, right? Because that's the risk that they're not, they're just telling you the benefit. So I think that with AI and with more clarity on wearables, and hopefully there's some ethical infusion into all this technology, how it's watching you and how it's marketing to you. Because trust me, it's pretty soon, once it knows everything about you, it'll tell you what you should buy.
Yeah.
And if it's the right thing, great. But if it's just to make money and maybe it doesn't work, that's the next kind of risk, is that someone's going to tell you, like a lot of these devices are now telling you what to buy.
Yeah.
So that's good if they're being honest. Right. And if they're not in bed with those companies. So how do you become an independent arbiter of what's good if you're not making money from it? I mean, because the idea is these people will come to you and say, hey, if you sell our product, you've got a big audience with your wearable. So
100%. There's a big supplement brand from somewhere in the Antipodes that makes a lot of money based off affiliate marketing, and you get it with all the wearables as well.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to
So I think there's just a couple of questions you just have to ask yourself. Like before you do anything.
Yeah.
Right. Is, do I know that what's in here? Okay. And if the answer is no, because the answer is no, then how do I find out what's in here? Okay, look at the back of the label. How do I know that's the truth? Right? That's just all it says. Then, are there websites that can validate that, because I think there was a study just on melatonin that, when you buy melatonin, there could be like 3% or 300% of the melatonin that they say is there in there.
Wow.
Because they're made in China and in Mexico and in India, and all the subcomponents, then they get manufactured and shipped over here and put in a pretty label, and you have no idea what's in there. So I think just being smarter about, and I think more companies are going to pop up to validate those things. So what's in it? Am I putting something on my body or in my body? Right? What's in it? That's question number one. Question number two is, what's the potential downside? Don't always go to what's the potential upside, because that's what you're buying. So a good consumer will say, what's the rub? Seems too good to be true. Yeah. If it's too good to be true, probably too good to be true. So be honest about and be skeptical and curious, right? And then if I do it, because I think I've done my homework, what do I need to do to validate that it's working? Taking into account that the placebo effect may account for 30% of me feeling better, and they may put ecstasy in there, and I definitely feel better.
Yeah.
So that there's this constant, back and forth you have to go through but I think it's just coming up with a framework of a couple of principles and a couple of questions, because I would much prefer people take matters into their own hands.
Let's draw that framework for the listeners right now. So what would you say, apart from the few questions that you were asking, is there anything else that you would recommend for them to do?
Well, I would ask yourself, well, first of all, I mean, we may get in trouble here, but no juice, no soda, these things. So what about orange juice? You mentioned orange juice. They did a study where they had a guy, 16-year-old kid, drink a big tall glass of orange juice. And then he ate a hamburger and a French fries and a milkshake, because they had told him not to eat for a day. His classmate, who was the same size, said, eat 6 oranges. He couldn't finish the 6th orange. He was full because there was so much fiber. Yeah. So, people don't know, but fiber is the thing that makes serotonin. So 95% of the serotonin in your body is made in your gut. Your microbiome takes fiber, trains it into short-chain fatty acids, converts it into tryptophan in the liver, and then it turns into serotonin. Serotonin is what makes you happy. When you don't have serotonin, what you think makes you happy is pleasure, which is dopamine. When you get pleasure, you want more. When you have serotonin and you're happy, you know how much more happiness you want when you're happy? None. You don't need more happiness, but you always need more pleasure. Yeah. Pleasure is the thing that everyone's hacking and selling you on that. So number one is, eat real food. If it comes in a package, if it comes in a box, if it comes in something yes, you can do that. But look at the ingredients. If there's ingredients that you can't pronounce, or there's a bunch of them, just skip. Yeah. It's better not to eat, actually. Our body actually, we live longer when we eat less. So eating less actually is good for the body, because I wrote another essay called Gravity, Oxygen, and Time. But oxygen, while we think it's the greatest thing in the world because we breathe it, and if we don't get oxygen, we don't feel good. We're short of breath. But oxygen is what causes oxidative stress. It creates energy in our body. And if you overeat or eat a bunch of chemicals, that disrupts the mitochondria from making serotonin. You're unhappy, so you seek more pleasure. You eat foods that give you pleasure, which makes you unhealthy, which leads, and then you're into this loop. So I think like diet is so foundational and ask yourself, am I eating 30 grams of fiber a day? So women should eat 30, men should eat 35. I guarantee you, if you do an audit of your diet today and you look at where the fiber is, most people are like way under, estimating, if they're even estimating it, but they're under eating fiber.
So I think most Americans get all their fiber from the cup of coffee they have in the morning, right?
Yeah, and there's no fiber in there.
Okay.
In coffee. Well, I mean, and then people say, well, how do I eat 30 grams of fiber? That's a lot. Like, when you can put fiber, put some chia seeds or whatever you want. I mean, there's ways you can buy Metamucil and just put it in water and drink it. You're feeding your gut. Your gut is what makes the precursors to serotonin. So it's not feeding you. It's feeding this gigantic thing called the microbiome, which, by the way, is... if you want to talk about frontier stuff, to me, it's neuroscience and the microbiome and AI. Those are the three things that will transform how we think about health. Not about healthcare, health. These other things are foundational. Are you getting enough sleep? I tell people, don't set an alarm clock to wake up. So do an experiment, go to bed early or early-ish, when you don't have to, and see how long it is before you wake up naturally. Turn the lights out, put the shades down. Don't let anything wake you up except your natural body. Okay. That's how long you need to sleep every day. And so most people like set an alarm clock, and humans are the only species on the planet that interrupt a critically important biological process, which is sleep, which is restorative. The brain clears out all the junk when you're sleeping. And so if you wake up too early, you left some garbage on the street. And that just accumulates. And then you get dementia and Alzheimer's. That's why sleep deficit. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Well, actually, you're going to be demented before you're dead because you're going to have too much garbage accumulated in your brain. So there is this, like, I tell people, set an alarm clock to go to bed. So, like, I'm a 7.5 hour sleeper. So if I need to wake up at this hour, I'll go to bed at that hour. If I don't have to wake up till that hour, I'll go to bed at that hour.
Sleep gets a lot of attention. Brian Johnson, again, always talks about his 100% sleep score, and we hear about this 8 hours a night. For myself, I find it difficult. Probably, it's been a difficult journey to get my sleep up to the 7.5 hour mark, because there's probably psychologically some things going on in my head, right, that keep me awake. It might be it's even when I've removed the dopamine hit of Instagram reels or whatever, there's something that's keeping me up at night or waking me up in the morning.
Well, there's two things. One is a large chunk of the population has something called sleep apnea, which is a structural organic phenomenon. If you have sleep apnea, you would never know it unless your spouse or partner told you that you have it. So there are now these companies, Empower Sleep, Sleepio, that you can just go online and put something on your finger, go to bed at night, wake up in the morning, and they'll tell you if you have sleep apnea. So if you have sleep apnea, you got to check the box off that I don't have that. If you don't have sleep apnea, which is like an important checkbox in your life, I think, because you sleep every night, then it's like, okay, I have problems getting all the sleep I want. So then you have, this is a psychodynamic phenomenon, right? This is your brain, this is your monkey brain not going to sleep. You're thinking about things. So there's a whole bunch of like sleep hygiene, I hate that term, but there's all these little techniques that you can do. They're not hard to find. I actually wrote an essay on some of them, but a lot of it requires therapy. Yeah. You need to actually identify these triggers that make you do that. You need to identify that when you start to ruminate on a thought in bed, what happens is then the next thought comes, and then they just keep coming, and then you go back, and then you keep coming. So one of the tricks that I do, I don't ruminate that much, but when I do, is I'll listen to a podcast at night that's very dense, but that's interesting topic. So I'm a geek, so I'll listen to philosophy podcasts, I'll listen to physics podcasts, nothing that's too complicated, but like interesting, or I'll listen to a linguistics podcast, something that's like not fun. Yeah. Right. It's not like you're not comedian, right? I like those too. And then, so as I'm in bed, I'm trying to follow and then I just fall asleep. Because I turn off my monkey brain, the ruminating brain. It can't get into gear because I'm actively trying to listen to something else while I'm sleeping, and then I just fall asleep. Yeah. Because I don't get. But there are strategies for sleep that usually requires a good therapist. We have a bunch of practitioners we work with. There's a bunch of telemedicine practitioners, and anything, Julie, it's an investment. If you want good sleep, take the time, take the money, instead of buying those lattes or whatever it is that you spend your money on, allocate like some segment of your budget. Don't look at it as a cost. Don't look at it as an expense. Look at it as an investment in your future self.
Yeah.
And then you find a good person. I have people that like, I bump in on the streets. They're like, Jordan, you saved I sleep so much better. My life is completely changed because you made me do those things. I didn't really make them. They wanted to, but I helped guide them through, the sleep psychologists and the apnea issues.
Yeah.
So you can do it. It's just, you got to put you can buy pills for it, or you can actually, you can like numb yourself with gummies and all these other things, which, there's good evidence that a little melatonin helps, little, CBD works. I mean, especially for women with menopause, because then there's no talk therapy. That is a biological issue that they need to like blunt the effects of hormones. But for guys like you, that's not the issue.
Okay, so you were talking a bit about physicians and philosophers, and one of your favorite physicians, Aulus Cornelius Celsus, butchering the name there, but he said, live in rooms full of light. Okay, this was actually in 25 BC. Well, he was alive between 25 BC and 50 AD.
30 AD or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So live in rooms full of light, avoid heavy food, be moderate in drinking of wine, take massage, baths, exercise and gymnastics, fight insomnia with gentle rocking or the sound of running water, change surroundings and take long journeys, strictly avoid frightening ideas, indulge in cheerful conversations and amusements, listen to music. Not much has changed in 2000 years, but the narrative that you were talking about through capitalism seems to create this idea that we need more, when actually it seems that we need less. How does that kind of go with the current narrative?
Well, we need better. Okay, so if there's more, so better can be more music. Better can be less scary thoughts. So I just, the concept of more or less is you have to calibrate that in the context of what it is you want more or less of.
Yeah.
It's not always more. It's not always less. But you have to, I think there's this honesty one has to have with self. Like, am I happy? Or not to be overly like happy, but we're all existentially challenged, right?
Yeah.
In some way. And, the biggest indicators for longevity are, do you have good social relationships and do you have a sense of purpose? Like, these are the things that, like all the studies show are like way more than exercise, sleep, and diet in terms of will you live long. And I feel like, sense of purpose is really, for a lot of people, it's even if you study like E.O. Wilson, who was a Harvard professor who studied ants and wasps, like these complex social structures, the groups of ants and bees that the ones that like helped each other out more in smaller groups always defeated the army of the much bigger ants or bees or wasps that were more selfish. They didn't help each other. So this sense of being in service or helping people, because ultimately we want people to help us, even though the person says, I don't need help from anybody. Yes, you don't. Of course, at some point, like you got here because someone helped you, right? We're all standing on the shoulders of others, and even what we want to accomplish or do. So I think that there is this component of how do we balance laughter? Like, how often do you laugh every day, right? How often do you let things go hard? These are not, more laughter, less things I have to remember. Like I tell people, I kind of joke that my biggest asset, my biggest liability is the same thing. It's my memory. And it's an asset because I can forget things I want to forget. But it's a liability because sometimes I can't remember things I want to remember. And, what Celsus said was really, how do you engage in the world in a way that like ultimately, if you're walking down the street by yourself, you're probably going to smile, right? Who does that? A lot of people are like, they're so focused on all these things that they forget that like we're here for a limited time. We have these amazing people around us that hopefully the good ones. I mean, get rid of the bad people around you. Like that's rule number one is avoid scary thoughts or, engage in cheerful conversation. Like who fills up your battery? Who charges you up? Find more of them. Who are the people that like bring you down? Get rid of them. Leave your job if you have to, if they're not around. Like you have to change your surroundings. Most people just get stuck. They think, I can't move. And I tell doctors all the time that should I go become concierge doctor? Seems so frightening to leave this safe little like cage that I'm in. I'm like, when you jump out of the cage, it's going to look really dark and it looks like you're jumping into some gigantic hole. There's like a soft pillow 2 feet down. You're going to land. You're not going to buckle your knees. But so don't be that afraid. It's going to work. If you are a good doctor and you care for people and you want to like do your best and within the framework of this concierge model, there's a million people out there. I mean, there's a lot of people that want that.
Yeah. So what do you think is going to be the key thing happening then over the next few years? What are going to be, like, how is this space going to change? We talk about psychedelics and digital twins and longevity movement and the need to make better choices. But in terms of private medical for your members, like, what are the key things that will change for them?
I think that nothing screws up a great story that you tell yourself like objective data. Right. So there are people that, like, I was talking to a guy this morning. He's like, I work out, I exercise, I can run, I look great, I weigh 155. And then, we did this test on his heart and it showed that there's a lot of soft plaques that, a couple of years ago we couldn't even see because we didn't have the technology. Yeah. I'm like, I don't care what you look like in the mirror. I mean, I do. I'm glad you look good and feel good. Right. Big, but we have to look on the inside. I mean, I'm an internal medicine doctor, right? External medicine doctors are called dermatologists, and that's the beauty market. I'm the, like, let's keep all the gears and pipes and pulleys and all the things inside, like, lubricated and, to use a machine metaphor, let's make sure everything's working and there's no damage. So I think the main thing is that we are now being able to see things that we couldn't have normally seen. We can now see around the corner and over the hill. Yeah. Given the proteomics, metabolomics, cell-free DNA, imaging, the AI. So I think one of the big things is going to be, how can we prevent disease, or how do we see it coming so early that we can modify it? So normally, you find the disease and then you treat it. I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be able to identify disease long before it actually shows up on traditional medical blood tests. And so I think the innovation in observational metrics of things, and it can even be the Whoop or Aura, it may tell you things like, I know that when I drink 2 glasses of wine or eat a meal too late, I get a worse night of sleep. So what do I want to do? I want to now eat earlier and drink less. Okay, well, that's no fun, quote unquote. But if I'm thinking about how I feel the next day, I feel better when I sleep better. So maybe I will drink less anymore. And if I do want to drink and eat late, maybe I'll binge and do that once or twice a month. Yeah. Cool. Like, I'm not going to turn it all off and be some skeptic or ascetic, because that's not what it's all about either. So I think that's part one. And then the part two is, I think we're going to really learn how, exercise and food, like these are really important bits as well. What are the foods that optimally, to prevent your blood sugars from going up and down to a point that, you can actually do too much exercise. So how do you calibrate, these things? And I also think, nothing's been invented on this score yet, but I call it social fitness and social nutrition, right? Yeah. Which goes back to, avoid scary thoughts and laugh with friends. And it's, how do you measure that? How do you know you're getting enough social nutrition and social fitness? How do you exercise your brain in a way that's net positive? Because neurodegenerative disease, right? I mean, the big things are cancer, heart attacks, neurodegenerative disease, and metabolic disease. Metabolic disease causes all of them. So metabolic disease is caused by food and caused by stress. And so I think what we're going to realize is that all of the things that are kind of contributing to our aging and our detriment are all things that we are doing to ourselves. You didn't get that disease, you gave it to yourself, but you didn't know it. And so now we're getting to the point where you can actually kind of know it.
Social fitness is like, so for example, I would go out and spend every day of the week with random people, right? Or some friends, and I'd feel exhausted by the end of the week. Let's go back to just to round things off. So you said AI, neuroscience, microbiome. These are going to be the key frontiers that are going to change the scope of medicine and eternal medicine and what we can do to make ourselves feel better. Let's go into your crystal ball. How are things going to change over the next 3 to 5 years? By 2030, how can I expect my day-to-day to have changed to hopefully have optimized how I feel about myself and feel in myself?
In 3 to 5 years?
Yeah.
I think in 3 to 5 years, there will be AI enhanced tools for doctors and people that will become like buddies or bodyguards against, for the people who want it, against the scams and the dangers. Like, I think there'll be more transparency in, I hope there will be, but I think that all the people who've been marketing stuff with no proof, they're gonna run into the wall of there's no proof. You can still market it and you can still, so I think there's gonna be kind of a reckoning of like, there's too much information out there. It's kind of like the credit card companies. Eventually, like once it all became transparent, like, okay, I'm not going to go with that one. I'm going to go with that one. That one's got a better interest rate or less fees. Like right now, it's so obscure. Yeah. So I think we're going to get a little more clarity into what's kind of really real and what's just a scam. Now, if you're just a sucker for a scam because you like that influencer, you may not look to these other things. I think there'll be trust marks out there that won't be government, but there'll be coalitions of a lot of people, or even the AI will do it itself. Yeah. So I think there'll be more visibility into what you do to yourself. I think there will also be more sophisticated wearables to tell you that the things that you're doing, you'll kind of get this dashboard of like your day and your life and your week. And it's kind of like, you didn't exercise this week. I looked at your calendar. Like, I'm your calendar AI. Yeah. And I didn't see anything in there. But I did see you have a standing desk and you stood up a lot. And so that gets you 80% of the. Gotcha. So I think there'll be these things that will be, you'll opt in. I don't think they're going to be, so that's how it won. And then I think, like I said, there's going to be all these tests that medicine's going to start to provide to give you deep insight into things coming around the corner, so you can make either small adjustments or bigger adjustments to behaviors that you make. Because ultimately everything's behavior. I think 7% of your longevity is dependent on genetics. Yeah. Now, of that 7%, like if you have one of those 7%, then it's 100%. But 93% of your health and happiness is predicated on decisions you make. So every decision is a healthcare decision. That's the kind of the heuristic. People don't think about it like that, but everything you do is going to make you happy or unhappy, healthy or unhealthy, and like, I don't think we have come to the conclusion that we realize that all these people that are like making all these, I'm not going to name names, but like that are spending $2 million a year on their body, every decision is a healthcare decision. Yeah. The smallest one, even you and I sitting here, like, this is an interesting conversation that I hope you think is interesting, or your listeners think is interesting. And, for me, like, I feel like I'm giving back some of the knowledge and the experience that I've learned back. So this feels good for me. This is like part of what, keeps me young. Yeah. So this is a healthcare decision. Doing a podcast with you was a healthcare decision. Most people wouldn't think about it like that. Right. I have a standing desk upstairs. That was a healthcare decision. It wasn't like so even, calling your mom I called her last night. How you doing? That was a healthcare decision for me and for her. Yeah. That was a connection thing. So once you start thinking of every decision as this like net positive, net negative, it opens up your eyes a little bit more. And I think with AI and all this stuff, we're going to be able to parameterize and say, that was good, that was bad. This is good, this is bad, Yeah.
Has it all got just too complicated? I know there are some beautiful communities around the world that have completely ostracized themselves from the workings of society and capitalism and live a life that is true to Cornelius himself.
It's not the blue zones, by the way. You know that, right? The blue zones got debunked.
Yeah, but there are some communities that are a bit more off-grid.
Yeah. It goes back to better is better, more is not better, less is not better. And I find that the answer is yes. Yeah. It has got too complicated. Everyone's trying to sell something. Everyone's trying to buy something. And at the end of it is like, most of the stuff that's going to help you live a long time is free. Sleep, it's free. Exercise, it's free. Hanging out with friends is free.
Yeah.
I say free. I mean, they're not a product. I mean, you can buy a Peloton or you can, buy these things. So sure, there's ways, but you can just walk outside. Like you can productize these free things. But food is really a big one, which is, I think that is the single most, important thing that, you have a decision to put something in your mouth. I mean, or maybe you don't. I mean, we get hungry, we have to eat, but what you eat qualitatively is really important.
This podcast is going to be released in January 2025, and RFK will be the new health secretary by then. Are you bullish on what might happen with a quite different approach to health in the US? I know he's an advocate for psychedelics and stem cells and hyperbaric chambers, etc., which all sounds good to some people and very scary to others.
So I would say that when I finished medical school in 1994, nothing changed in medicine until like 2010. And the biggest change was Claritin, which is this invented Claritin D, like the decongestant version of it. Like there was no real breakthroughs in cancer. Yes, we had Genentech and they were doing some, but nothing happened for 20 years. I mean, literally, you'd read the journals and it was like, okay, atrial fibrillation, we found a new thing, And then in the last 5 years, every 120 days, there's something really important happening because of computational power, because of all the research that's been finally coming to conclusion. There's all this other stuff. And so I think the medical system, going back to what I was saying earlier, is kind of ossified in a lot of ways. And so some of the things, like a lot of people say, well, we need these protocols in place for safety. I'm like, yes, but is it safer today? So I think that the system is like all things in life. They grow, they build, they die, they grow, they build. I mean, everything's a cycle. And I think we're at a cycle where the healthcare system is like this gigantic bloated, we're spending more and we're getting worse outcomes. We're not getting better. We're getting sicker. Does he have the answer? I don't know.
Yeah.
Would the next administration, if somebody else have the answer? I don't know. But I do think we need a different thinking at play. I'm not for the let's just let's move fast and break things. Yeah. This is like still move slow and don't kill people, but let's move in the right direction. Let's challenge some of the sacred cows a little bit. I don't believe we should embrace things that don't have science behind them. Right? There's a lot of things being promoted that like the science is just weak sauce, and we don't want weak sauce science. I'm a true believer that like the science needs to be of the highest caliber, and the scientific method of all the different, rubrics of scientific method is science seeks falsifications. It means that if a scientist says, hey, I just discovered this, what that means is, hey, everybody, reproduce it and see if you can reproduce it. And if you can reproduce it, then we will call that like high quality evidence. If I did it and other people can't reproduce it, then I'm just selling something that I found out in my lab. But if you did something and you've got, it should be reproduced. So in the world of science, we seek falsifications because that's how we get to good science.
Yeah.
On the other hand, marketing seeks confirmations. They want to be right and they don't want to be wrong. So anybody that's out there telling you, I'm not wrong, I don't care what they say, but I'm not going to show you that this has been reproduced somewhere else by high quality, credible people. But that's not to say, there's something called the pessimistic meta-induction theory. That's a mouthful. What is that? What that says is that everything that we believe today, you should take this antibiotic for that infection, or even that antibiotic for infection, disproved something else that was before that. So everything we believe disproved a different way of thinking. We used to think that it was humors that caused infections. Now we think it's bacteria, right? And so that means that everything that we believe today will be overturned by a new thinking tomorrow. So I am intellectually honest about the fact that we live under a pessimistic meta-induction process. That's the way science works. I'm intellectually curious to know what the next thing is. I don't believe in dogma, and so I think you need to have this intellectual honesty that like, here we are right now and what we have is the best we got, but we're going to get better and different. It may not, and it may be sideways, but the future is going to, unfold all these. That's why I don't believe in like the dogma of this is the only way. But the medical system, by and large, once they believe something, they find it hard to believe something else because it's so entrenched and it's so conservative and so patriarchal.
So if I were to come to your clinic in London in 2028, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's play a game.
Okay.
Would I be able to, would you be able to administer a course of psilocybin for me over a weekend? Do you think that'll happen, true or false?
In London.
In London, and then let's do in Austin, Texas.
I think that might be a little bit aggressive, only because there is a lot of science and scientists at academic UCSF right up here, Duke, Johns Hopkins, New York, and those scientific studies are bubbling up and trying to break through the ceiling of historical cultural dogma that this is like a countercultural drug.
Yeah.
This is helping veterans with PTSD. This is helping real people. But the mainstream, and not the mainstream media, just good old fashioned conservatives think this is like San Francisco psychedelic, Tim Leary, tune in, tune out. But it's not, it's real. So the question is when will government structures like embrace what the science, it's early science now.
Yeah.
But like that, I won't go into the details, but we're very close to a lot of science is not being falsified and being proven and reproduced. And at some point you can't argue with it anymore. You can yell to the face that, but the science will beat the cultural argument that this is good and it works. So I would say maybe 2030 in London. I don't know how progressive they are in London, but in Austin, it'll be in 2027.
Okay. Stem cells.
So I'm very good friends with some of the top stem cell researchers in the world. There is no evidence right now that stem cells are scientifically reproducible. It's all anecdotal. It's all small sample size. There's a lot of money to be made in stem cells. And so at best, like I said, go back to the placebo effect. It works. It's not a fake thing. It's a true phenomenon that, every drug trial they do, they give some placebo and some not, and placebo works for cancer and for depression and for everything. So if you do something, and there's a whole reason why it works, which is a whole separate podcast, but which is if you take your own stem cells from your own fat, spin them in a thing, and put them back in you, and you feel better. Was that you, or was that the placebo or stem cells? And so there's a lot of people doing research on stem cells in the United States. And they will say it's not ready for prime time. Yeah. So where you have to go? You got to go to Bermuda. You got to go to Mexico. You got to go to these places where they don't have a rigorous, and let's not conflate government regulations with good science. Because the government and their cultural and you couldn't legalize pot because them damn hippies, whatever it was, even though pot now it's being legalized because there is no negative effect. It was a cultural thing. And so stem cells, they're on kind of the other end, which is people are like, I'm going to do stem cells. Woohoo. I'm going to go to, but the science isn't there. Going back to my question, show me the randomized clinical trial that was reproduced to show that this stuff works. And if it doesn't, you are gambling. Do I think stem cells are going to have meaningful impact? Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. They're going to have massive impact, but it's not going to be the live longer stem cells. It's going to be the repair damaged stem cells to specific organs, blindness, hearing, muscle atrophy. It's going to start with how do you fix these problems that you have so it can rejuvenate me. I think the med spa stem cells, that's a parlor game. Yeah. Right now.
What about, just a few more, I promise. What about hyperbaric chambers in your office here?
So hyperbaric oxygen is used for burns and it works. It's used for the bends and from scuba diving and it works. It's used for athletes for like post major endurance, and it works. So if I have a scuba diver or a burn victim or an athlete, I'll definitely have one in my office. I'm not going to have any of those. So then there's the kind of hyperbaric tourism that I think you're referring to, where there's some early evidence that it's beneficial, but right now it's still weak sauce evidence. So in 2028, I don't know where the evidence is going to land on this. I mean, if you think about it, what drives metabolic and oxidative stress? Oxygen. So if you put a ton of oxygen in your body, is it good? Bad. Now, there's lots of people and smart people that think it's good. There's also some people that would say, well, don't know. Yeah. So I'm not like a hater or a lover of it. I'm still watching where this goes, but I'm watching like the real academic medical centers in the lab. I'm not watching the guy with the oxygen chamber and telling all my patients feel better. Like, that's not science.
Jordan, thank you. I think the reason why I say thank you so in capital letters is I think often people think of these, let's call them health optimization trends or longevity trends, and think they're not backed by science. But what I'm hearing from you constantly is everything that you preach about and talk about and administer to your members is clearly backed by science, as it should be by an internal medicine doctor. And I think bridging that gap, especially as this new administration comes into play, is important as well. So I appreciate everything you've said.
Well, one of the things I was going to say is so I put on this event called Doc. It's doc.health. And it was Truth in Medicine was the banner. And we are publishing a newsletter from there that is going to be interviewing all these scientists at the top of their fields. I don't know if I'm allowed for promotion here, but but it's a free newsletter that we're going to start highlighting all the things that like real science is, and and we're going to ask people to submit, like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And then we will go out and interview the top people in the field and try to figure out where does it land? Is it totally validated? Is it totally BS? Or is it like TBD? Yeah. So
I think some sort of like rating system or scorecard based off of 5-10, a jury of 5-10 known people like yourself.
Well, and 5-10 people that like span the spectrum. Yeah. So you'll get your RFK like people like that are scientists, and then you'll get like these super geeky academicians that like, but you don't want to, you want to make sure you have a good composite of a panel, which is what we're doing. Yeah. So I hope that like Doc becomes a version of like, okay, if I want to find out as much as, because there is no such thing as the truth. There's just versions of accuracy. Right. So ultimately what you want in science is like a lot of things pointing to accurate. Yeah. Because when someone says something's true, I'm like, wait a minute. Pessimistic meta-induction theory. It's true now. It'll be untrue later. Yeah. So let's agree that it's accurate. And even when you get into evidence, like real evidence, and this is, I'll say something somewhat heretical, but there's no evidence for evidence when you're dealing with populations, because everyone's an individual. So when someone says, well, this study says you should do this, that's what the evidence says. Well, that study had 10,000 people in it, and some of them were right in the middle, but some of them were on either end of this, Gaussian distribution, which means that it may not apply to you. And that's personalized medicine and precision medicine is how do I make sure I know which one you are within the evidence? And I think that's where we're going to get to. We're going to know where you are in the context of the evidence so we can more precisely target you, which means that everyone's their own universe. There are no two people that are the same, and trying to find out who you are and what's going to work best for you in the context of like as accurate as the evidence is where you need to point your future.
Any other shout outs before we wrap up?
Shout outs. Yeah. I would give a shout out to Eric Verdin from the Buck Institute for doing amazing research on longevity and aging. I would give a shout out to Len Zahn at Harvard, doing research, started the International Stem Cell Research Foundation. I would give a shout out to Thomas Rando at UCLA, Broad Institute for Stem Cell Research, and Helene Blau at Stanford. These are the three, people that I think are the top of the field. I would say that if anybody wants to see what I'm reading, I post on LinkedIn little bullets of what I read. I have a Substack that I post essays on, and I have a lot of essays coming up just on how to think about this stuff. It's not prescriptive. It's frameworks. It's how to help people ask better questions so that they can have a healthier life.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool. Thanks for listening to the Beyond Tomorrow podcast. Your support helps this journey reach more people. So if you've enjoyed it, please share, subscribe, or leave a review. See you next time.